Hello, my name is Alexandra Caneda, and I'm interning it now. So Rick Johnson joined Lake Research Partners in 2004 as a senior analyst and is now the senior vice president. He is also a professor at the George Washington University Graduate School of Public Management, where he teaches political polling and qualitative research methods. In addition, Rick Johnson has helped women get elected to office at all levels of government, from city council to U.S. Senate. Apart from being managing director at Lake Research Partners, Rick has also worked on issues regarding women's rights, immigration reform, domestic violence, health care reform, and capital punishment.
Hi everyone, my name is Renee Stollender, and I am one of the other interns now. And I'll be introducing Julie Greene. Julie Greene is the Deputy Director for the AFL-CIO Political Department, working to empower working families, educate voters, and conduct get out the vote activities. Prior to her appointment as Deputy Director, Greene served as Assistant Director for the Political Department and as an AFL-CIO Campaign Operations Analyst. She is the founder of The Next Step, a bipartisan nonprofit focused on the professional development of young female political leaders, and recently received the Young Woman of Achievement Award for Labor and Community Organizing from the Women's Information Network. We are excited to have Julie Greene here with us today and look forward to learning from her valuable experiences. Thank you.
And I have taken the privilege of introducing the third member of our panel, Dr. Janet Canterbury. After a distinguished career as a professor of medicine and a senior associate dean of the at his University of Miami Miller School of Medicine, Dr. Canterbury is now Deputy Dean Emeritus of the medical school. She headed a successful project to enhance recruitment and professional development of women and minority faculty. Dr. Canterbury has authored over 100 original scientific and medical articles and is a member of many prestigious societies, including the National Academy for Women's Health Education. A committed women's rights activist, Dr. Canterbury has worked with NOW for many, many years. She was twice elected president of Dade County NOW, Florida, and served as the Florida NOW president as well. Dr. Canterbury served 2 terms on the national board as Southeast Regional Director and currently co-chairs the advisory committee to National NOW's board. Dr. Canterbury chaired the ERA study committee that resulted in NOW's adoption of a new constitutional equality amendment. She continues to be honored for her tireless work on behalf of women. Among others, she has received the Mae Brunson Faculty Award from the Women's Commission, American Business Women's Association Woman of the Year Award, American Medical Women's Association Woman of the Year Award, and a Woman of Power Award from NOW. Her best credential, however, is that she is my closest and dearest friend for 30 years. And it's only because she's so smart and accomplished. Madison, please help me welcome Rick Johnson.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all. It's very much a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to get a little street cred with my 2 daughters, so thank you very much. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the rising American electorate and specifically unmarried women and why this is a key group for the upcoming election. So the rising American electorate, it's a term that gets thrown around quite a bit, and really it refers to unmarried women, people of color, and those under the age of 30. And when you look at those groups and compile them together, actually it ends up being roughly 53% of all eligible voters. So clearly it's an important group overall. When we extract unmarried women from that group and hold them out on their own, that ends up being 25% of the voting population. So it's an absolutely key demographic that would be, a candidate would be hard-pressed to win their elections if they don't have the attention of this group. So And we do get asked, well, why do you have to put in the marital status? Well, marital status statistically ends up being one of the key determinants in terms of registration, turnout, and vote preference. So it does make a difference. This may be a little hard to see for some of the folks in the audience, but essentially, if you look at, this is a map of the unmarried women population by state. So the darker the state, the higher the percentage of unmarried women that are in that state. And a few things should jump out to you. You know, we're used to hearing those battleground state names, and there's a neat overlap here with some of those states. You have Nevada, New Mexico, North Carolina, and you know, certainly in some of the key congressional districts, you'll also have populations of unmarried women who could really swing an election. So being able to mobilize unmarried women is going to be key for the upcoming elections and certainly beyond, because the trend is that among all of the components of the rising American electorate, those population centers are growing, but unmarried women are certainly growing at a very fast rate. When we look at, you know, great, we know that's a large percentage of people, and that's important, but when we dig into the numbers a little bit, and you look at marital status of women by whether they have children or not, you can see a couple key things. You have only 30% of unmarried women with children who vote. So there's no judgment here, because, you know, if you've got 2 jobs and you're trying to raise kids, that's a huge challenge. But in terms of a group that desperately needs to have their voice heard, this is certainly one of them. When we look at the marital gap again, in terms of the presidential race, you can see a clear difference as well. There's a 44-point gap between unmarried women and married women in their support of President Obama versus President Romney. So something should jump out at us, a couple things. The first is certainly, as we have talked about, you know, the importance of mobilizing, and, you know, so you need to register and you need to get unmarried women to turn out. But also for married women, you know, I wouldn't say, well, let's just write them off. It's a real opportunity to make sure that married women fully understand what the candidates really stand for, and how do the candidates' stances impact the important issues in their lives. So while I'll be continue to focus on unmarried women, I would not say that we should write married women off by any means. So unmarried women in the economy. Some real challenges that with the recovery that's gone on in the economy, 31% of the jobs have been filled by women, 69% have been filled by men. 66% of unmarried women compared to 40% of married women reported having trouble paying a bill on time this past year. So there are serious economic challenges facing all of us, but certainly to a disproportionate amount of unmarried women. Another statistic that shows how challenging that environment is, that 17% of unmarried women go without health insurance, compared to 8.8% for married women, 8.6% for married men, and 28% of unmarried women. So marital status has a huge impact on the likelihood of having insurance. When we look at issues overall, this is the kind of list that you might see really from Americans overall. When we see what are the most important issues, jobs in the economy certainly jump out as number 1 and number 2, and often people will link those 2 things together because they will see one driving the other. If people don't have jobs, it's challenging to make the economy flourish. So jobs are sort of seen as that cornerstone of the economy. So the good news with this is when the issues that are going to be debated and talked about They will be the issues that unmarried women want to listen to and will be attentive to. We just need to make sure that the information is framed in a way that resonates with them. When we look at the congressional ballot, we can see that overall, you've got 49% of unmarried women who would support the Democrat running for Congress, as opposed to 23% who support the Republican running for Congress. So a little erosion since January, but nothing that I would actually be alarmed about right now. But it does signal, again, if we can mobilize this group, it could have a huge impact. So in terms of perceptions, who would do better when it comes to some of the key issues? When we asked unmarried women, again, we said jobs and the economy was their top concerns. 66% of unmarried women said that President Obama would do a better job with jobs. 57% said that President Obama would do a better job with the economy. And when it comes to sharing your values, 66% of unmarried women believe that President Obama shares their values, as opposed to 25% who say Governor Romney shares their values. And then we look at some other key issues, for the approval rating for President Obama. He has a 58% approval rating on jobs among unmarried women, and 56% approval rating on the economy. So really a pretty favorable rating, and a group that is favorable to the president overall, which would bode well for him in the election. And my last slide, this is a little bit of an eye chart, so we'll make sure it's available to all of you. But what I want to emphasize, these were some of the closest races, congressional races, in 2010. And all of you sitting in the room, I'm sure, have done your part in the past to knock on doors, to make phone calls, to send emails, to try to mobilize friends and potential friends to get involved. So there are times people say, well, boy, I thought I just did this. Do I really need to go through this all over again? Gee whiz. The answer is absolutely yes. There were less than 9,000 votes that separated a Democratic win from a Democratic loss in 2010. So that was a net swing of 12 congressional seats because we were able to get the votes we needed. Conversely, we could have lost 10 seats if we hadn't gotten 23,000 votes. So the margins, when one of our clients is Jerry Conley in Virginia, 920 votes. 920 votes is it. We had a fantastic candidate who was running in Northern California. And the type of progressive that the people in this room would love to have elected, stands shoulder to shoulder with you all on all of the issues that are important to you. In California, it's the top two to go on. And he lost by 350 votes to be able to move on to the next round. 350 votes. So I would say, please, it can be tiring continuing to go out and try to get people involved, especially with the cynicism that has taken place and the atmosphere that we're in. But I would ask you all to please persevere as you always have, and continue to fight that fight, because there's so much riding on this, there's so much at stake. And honestly, I can tell you now, somebody 2 years from now is going to have another one of these charts, and there are going to be elections that are just as close, if not closer. Every vote really counts, and hopefully you'll be able to help get more folks to register and get to the polls. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. As you know, we had a plenary yesterday that focused on why we need to be actively involved and successful in these elections. This plenary is more about how we achieve success in the elections. One of the ways, of course, will be to organize with our allies, and so I'm going to ask Julie Greene to speak next.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to start by saying thank you to Patricia and to the National Organization for Women for having me here. Also, thanks to Rick, who I've worked with for years, and I'm just very honored to be on this panel with Dr. Canterbury, who obviously has made such great contributions to women just throughout her life. And on a personal note, I love talking to my labor brothers and sisters, but it is rare that I get to talk to a room full of politically engaged women. So I am just excited to be here and bring this message to you. One of the things that the AFL-CIO is working on, and that is a huge part of our political program this year, is a voting rights component, voter registration and voter suppression. One of the things that I want to focus on with my presentation today is just what has happened with our ability and right to be able to just vote. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to just kind of tell a quick story and then get into what you can do and how we are engaged in this. You don't really have to go that far back in time to kind of see what's happened here. 4 years ago, we had a historic election, electing the first African-American president in Barack Obama. That election, you know, what we saw was record turnout, the highest turnout in 4 decades. We saw, you know, Obama winning 70% of all new voters. This is people who had registered to vote for 2008. And Democrats adding about 2/3 to their regular voting rolls. This isn't something that went unnoticed 2 years later in 2010, which was, I think, a difficult year for all of us on the progressive side. As you all know, the 2010 elections changed the makeup really on the state level, which I think is the pain that we've all really been feeling, of changing a lot of democratically controlled state houses from Democrat to Republican. And in fact, in 2010, Republicans picked up 678 legislative seats. And I think we all know what followed from there. We've seen attacks on immigrants, we've seen attacks on workers, and we have definitely seen and experienced different attacks on women. I think something else that was going on that, you know, not too many people realized was happening at the same time was that there was a dedicated attack on our rights and abilities to just be able to vote. In 2011 alone, there were only three states that didn't introduce some sort of voter suppression legislation during their legislative sessions. This is what the map looked like in 2011 in terms of the activity that took place. And I know some of the colors are a little off, but the states in red are states where bills passed. I think if we look at those states and kind of compare where we've seen some dedicated attacks on women, there's a lot of overlap there. The states that are kind of in purple are states where a bill passed, but a governor vetoed the voter suppression bill. The states in yellow are states where bills were carried over to 2012, and the states that are in blue are states where bills were defeated or they just weren't acted on. So when I'm talking about voter suppression legislation, here's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about cutting back the rights and abilities of just everyone to vote early, requiring proof of citizenship, partisan voter purges, which we see actively happening right now in Florida, ending same-day registration, discouraging or making it very difficult for third-party groups to go out and just register voters, and I think something that we've all heard quite a bit about, voter ID. Now, voter ID is something that I'll touch on a little bit in just a couple of minutes and just explain why it's so bad, because on the face, it sounds very good, but this particular legislation is something that affects women in a disproportionate way. So why does it matter to us? Why does it matter to women? Well, we're 52% of the voting population. If you look at what happened in 2008, we had about 70 million women vote, as opposed to about 61%. That's 10 million more women who participated in the voting process. And also, if you look back at 2008, women strongly preferred Obama to McCain. Women beat men in 2008 in every single age category. And this is the only bar chart that I'll show, because I'll leave that to Rick in the polling realm. But I think that this is pretty compelling to look at when you just think about the power of women to use and execute their ability to vote. In general, you all are probably familiar with a lot of these numbers. So we're 52% of the voting population, but only 16% of federal elected offices are held by women. It dropped for the first time in 2010. And the composition of women who are elected officials on the state level is much, much worse. In some states, it's only 10%, some states, only 34%. And I think in some cases, but not in all, this kind of goes to why we've experienced some of the attacks that we have. Not that all women support all the issues that those of us in this room do, but it's part of the story. And again, this is just a snippet of what we've seen. We had a governor, a very activist Republican governor in Wisconsin, who not only, who not only carried out a dedicated attack on the labor movement, but also repealed the ability of the equal pay law. We're seeing personhood amendments being pushed around this country on the state level, and we also have a presidential candidate who really won't say where he stands on things like the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Act. So, this is Dorothy Cooper. Dorothy Cooper is someone who you should get to know. Dorothy Cooper is 96 years old. She lives in Tennessee. And in 2011, when Tennessee passed their voter suppression bill, which included a voter ID component, Dorothy wasn't, she wasn't discouraged. She wanted to vote. So she went to her local DMV. She had a police ID that had been issued to her, and she had her voter registration card. She went to go get her voter ID. They said that that wasn't sufficient enough documentation. See, again, remember, Dorothy's 96. She was born before the 19th Amendment passed. She grew up during Jim Crow, and she had voted in every single election that she had been able to for the last 70 years. So when she was told that, she didn't have enough ID, she said, okay, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna get my ID and I'm gonna come back. She's 96 years old. I don't like going to the DMV and I'm 32. Okay? She went home, she got her birth certificate, she got her social security card, she got a copy of her lease, she came back with her police ID and her voter registration card. They said it still wasn't enough because she didn't have her marriage license. Dorothy was born with a different name than she had when she got married. And this is how voter ID disproportionately impacts women. Okay, and not just 96-year-old women, but all women. When I think about this story, and I think about a 96-year-old going back twice to a DMV who probably can't get around that easy, but who was compelled to protect her right to be able to participate in the electoral process, I'm very inspired. But I also think about how many other women who are older who wouldn't keep going back. Dorothy took her story to the press. She made a big deal about it. She got that law changed. She now has the ability to vote. But this is why we have to keep this fight up. So what can you do? Make sure that you are registered to vote. There are more states than Florida who are doing these partisan voter purges. Check and make sure. You may think that you are on the registration rolls. Check it out, make sure that's the case. If not, make sure you register. Second thing you can do, vote. That's what you can do, participate in this political process. And then make sure that you carry this message to your friends and family, and make sure that they're registered to vote, and that they execute their ability to vote. Get active. We are going to need more poll workers and poll monitors at the polls monitoring what happens in this election than ever before. We've got a lot of redistricting that's happened. We have precincts that have moved. There's going to be an extreme amount of confusion at the polls. This is something you can do. And you can spread the word about just what has happened in this country. At the AFL-CIO, we have a page called myvotemyright.org. There you can see we have one-pagers that you can download right here on voter registration rights for all states. And here there's just a general link to one-pagers for every single state in the United States. 17 states for both of these are translated into Spanish, by the way, where you can see just in general what has changed in the laws in your state, what you need to be able to vote. And then at the Take Action part, this is where you can sign up to be a poll worker or a poll monitor. Everywhere that I'm going, when I'm talking about this to different groups, like National Organization for Women, or just around the country, or within our own labor family, I'm making sure to highlight this. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 million people are estimated to be disenfranchised from voting because of what's happened to our ability and rights to vote just within the last 2 years. So I'm going to leave you with the charge to make sure that you get active, make sure that you are registered, and make sure that you vote this year. Thank you.
We have some additional information from Dr. Canterbury, starting with the difference women make and looking at an overview of politics nationwide, and then we'll move on to what you can do.
As we begin, I want to start with a disqualifier, an important disqualifier. That data that I'm about to present to you is my own analysis. It does not represent totally the National Organization for Women, and no one does this work alone. I've used tremendous numbers of resources, political pundits, news articles, parties, laborers, opinions, of all kinds of opinions. And of course, I have consulted mightily with our own experts. Linda Bird is always the person that I call. She was on vacation when I called her last time about some polling that I just couldn't understand. She said, "Oh, I'm driving in the car." I said, "Well, I don't care about that. You have to answer the question." But Bonnie Gravenhofer is always available to give me information, as is Alice Cohan, who are very good. Now, we seem to have lost the color, but what the heck, we'll figure it out. We always talk about we have to elect more women, we have to elect more women. But when you go to look for empiric data that shows that having more women makes a difference, it's not really so easy, because it's this little piece of data or that, but you can't really see, document, and show. So what I've done is I took the 15 states with the highest percentage of women legislators. And the average is, I think, I've lost my notes. Oh, Patricia knows, it's 23.7. Here you will see that Colorado is first. It has 40%. Which one of these points? Oh, thank you. So this is Colorado down here, and you just go down these top 15 states. And then I quantified just reproductive, those states which had the most oppressive laws on their books, their states, for women. And these are those same 15 states with the highest numbers of women legislators. I took the 15 states which had the best laws, or the least restrictive is how we have to say it, against women's reproductive rights. And you can see there's a pretty dadgum good correlation in here. Colorado used to be, down here, you used to have Colorado be very good, but the people out there couldn't get these repressive laws passed just through their legislation, so they started going the petition, signing up, getting them onto the books. But this is a good correlation when you look at 15 states and you look at the best situations for women, and you see that none of them are in that. These are the least number of women registered, the bottom 15 states. And those 15 states, you may recognize your own state. It's always depressive to see your state in one of these kinds of things. But here are the worst. The worst states have passed the most oppressive legislation against women's reproductive rights. And you see that 11 out of the 15 superimposed perfectly. It's almost .001 correlation, which means it could have only happened by accident, these two things being related. So it's clear that women make a difference. Now, I want to look, and did look with you at things. These are factors as we go through to keep in mind that are important. It's really early in the electoral cycle. Many states have not had their primaries. We don't know who the final candidates are going to be for your state house or your Senate or your congressional reps. So there's a lot of unknown at this point. We do know a lot, however, about the presidency. And then we have to keep in mind that there are a lot of factors out there which are influencing how elections are going to go this cycle. And those really, when you look at them, the effect of race, the effect of religion, and the enthusiasm factor, which is hard to define but very important. We just heard from Julie talking about how enthusiastic the electorate was for Mr. Obama when he ran last time. We heard Rick talk about what a difference it made just getting those extra votes, and that the Democrats took states that they haven't taken for years. So those factors are very important. We have an African-American president. We have his major component being of a religion which many don't consider to be Christian, and shout from the rooftops that we're a Christian country, etc. But those things change, so that they come into play. Another thing that we need to understand as we go through is that how the Senate comes out, I have determined with looking at multiple factors, the single most important determinant of who's going to win the Senate race is how the presidential race played out in that state. Now, for example, we've got this really tight race up in Massachusetts between Elizabeth Warren and Scott Brown, who's the Republican incumbent. In fact, the polls work out to be 0.3 difference between them at this time. They both made gaffes, which is tradition in all politics. He tried to carry on about her claiming to be an Indian, and she has now had quite a bit to say about him talking in secret to kings and queens. So they both make gaffes. But the truth is, Massachusetts is a Democratic state. For him to win in that state, he will have to outperform Obama's performance by probably 10 points. So it's not going to be easy. I don't think Mr. Romney's a popular person there. But this is going to come into play in every race. So who gets the presidency or for that state is going to be. The House currently, I have not analyzed the House in detail this year. My best guess, and Ellie, you should talk to her because she seems to think that we actually have a chance to take back the House. I see us picking up about 15 seats. So here, let's look at the presidential election quickly. Not having the kind of equipment that my colleagues have here, in fact, I'm going to steal Julie's iPad. Your beautiful slides over there. I just copied some slides and changed interactives and changed them. This is how I see the presidency, and actually this is pretty much how most serious pundits at this time see it. The red, of course, are the Republican states. The electoral votes are in them. The bluish purple ones are the Democratic states at this time. And those that are beige or gray or however it shows up out there, those are what are called the swing states. You've heard about them twice already today. They're important states that are going to make a difference. But if I take this data and only add Colorado into the Democratic column, this is where we stand today. Now, this could change. Some of the polls and some of the studies that have led me to these decisions are within the margin of error. But this is how I see it. This race is winnable. Obama has 221 electoral votes. He's going to have 270. This is the whole world down here. This, I can't make this up. This whole bottom, this 147 votes, is where we have to concentrate. And that's what we have to look at. Now, when I look at these states, with all the latest polls and how they shake out, the reddish ones are leaning strongly, in as strong as you can be at this time, toward Romney. The bluish ones, and I'm not sure they came out so blue, are for Obama. And what is absolutely a dead tie are Florida and Ohio. They are going to be the key swing states. No one can predict them. You have to be careful about polls. When I looked at the polls, you'll see 5 polls that came out that day, and they all say Obama's winning, and one says Romney's winning. Or it can be the reverse. So you have to go back to each poll. How was it conducted? How was the data gathered? Was it a robocall? Was it personal interviews? Was it likely voters? Was it, you have to go through a whole lot. And I have to say, just between you and I have come to have some difficulty in interpreting Rasmussen polls. So I have eliminated them from all of my analysis, because sometimes they've got Obama up by 10, and the next day they got him down by 10. Now, there's nothing that happened overnight, no matter what it was, that made a 20-point shift in how those things happen. So with that sort of things, I have come up with some probabilities. I actually calculate out of these states of what's left. It's Nevada. Well, the 3 that I can't come up with any definite tag to are Nevada, Ohio, and Florida. But these are the probabilities, mathematical, and they're just mathematical. And I have been attacked by my good friend from Montana, who has told me over and over this weekend that John Tester can win. How can I put him in the Republican? I said he leans Republican. And that's that human factor. You people live in that state. You may know, not may know, you probably know far better than I do. But what I've determined is there are 72, 74 possibilities of how you can take those unknown states to create a win of enough electoral votes for Obama. So we can do this. It's not set yet, but it means it's doable. I came up with about 45, as of this morning, possibilities of how Mr. Romney, I keep forgetting his name, Mr. Romney is going to win. And it's interesting to me because we have to take either, we, meaning the Democrats, and our side, the progressives, have got to take Florida or Ohio. He has to take both. That is an important, there are only 48 possibilities if he takes both Florida and Ohio. The most frightening thing to me is I came up with 10 possibilities that would allow a tie, which means it's going to go to the House of Representatives. So then I've looked at the Senate and quickly just going through it. Right now the Democrats have a majority, their caucus has a majority of 54 votes. That's 2 independents, the vice president and the Democratic senators. The Republicans have 47. Unfortunately, there are 33 seats up this election, and 21 of them belong to the Democrats. So it's our turn to really have to scratch it out. Here's the Senate as I see it at this time. The states that are washed out don't have any elections. Those bluish ones are our Democratic senators. I did include Ohio in there based on the last 3 days poll. So we can run the presidency. We just have to figure out all that other, how we put it together. And the beige colored ones are swing states. They're swing states in that we're not quite sure how they're going to win. Now, of interest to us, of course, is to look up here at Wisconsin. I just pushed the wrong buttons. To look at Wisconsin. They have not had their primary yet. I can tell you with great certainty that if in the Republican primary, Tommy Thompson emerges as the candidate, Tammy Baldwin is going to have a hell of a time winning. But she can beat the others. And the good news is that when the Republicans had their caucus, their state caucus a week ago, Tommy Thompson came in third. They consider him too moderate. And that's good for us, because if they don't put him in every statewide poll against all of the other candidates, Tammy Baldwin comes ahead. So that's one of our big concerned states. Again, we would like to take Florida. Bill Nelson is a doable guy. He's a good guy. Connie Mack is no smarter than he ought to be. And his father was a great senator. His grandfather was a great baseball player. And because of that, you know, he's running and maybe winning. So then we just got to look at, here's how I take these swing states. These are the 33 that are up for the, if I had my distance glasses, I could probably see them. I think the Republicans, it's easier if I go back to this map with these things. I think the Republicans are definitely going, I think we'll take New Mexico. Nevada is Shirley Berkeley, whom we'd like to see win, has not been ahead in any poll. So, but the state is going to go for Obama, and that may be enough to pull her through. My colleagues, again from Montana, assure me that John Tester can win. I hear you've got fan blood here. North Dakota is going to be very difficult, but that recent ballot initiative may give Heidekamp the push that she needs. The women up there are pretty pissed about their rights being I think that we will take Virginia. I think Kane will come out. I think that it will be done only if we get a strong, strong turnout in Northern Virginia. It is doable, totally doable. And so that's important. Maine is going to go probably to Angus King, who's an independent, who's, you know, he's not talking when it comes to who he's going to vote for. So when you do all of this and you finish up, this is where I think we are. It's just as tight as it can be. I think that we're going to have about, my calculations give us 48 based on a whole, I mean, literally stacks of data. I think they're going to have 40. I think the ones that are going to make the difference and are going to be critically important are Massachusetts, which is doable with enough work and enough push, Nevada and Wisconsin. I think that no one knows which way Maine is going to go. They're in the driver's seat. But I think we will end up with a 50-50 Senate, and the Vice President's vote will make the difference. So women in the U.S. Senate is, no matter what happens, I think stands to have a big improvement Of the 6 women that are having to stand Democrats for re-election, 5 of them look very good. 5 of them will, I think, be re-elected. The one who is in serious trouble is McCaskill in Missouri. That state's going to go Republican, and it's just not, I don't see how she can take that state. But she does have $6 million more than her opponent, which, you know, in this day and time, that doesn't mean much as we auction off Senate seats, but maybe it will be enough. And then we have 6 good women running. Hirano in Hawaii should be able to come ahead of Case in the primary when it occurs. And I think that that state will go Democrat, despite the popularity of Linda Lingle, who was the GOP nominee, who was the previous governor, because it's Obama's home state, and they will turn out to keep the Democratic. And that vote should carry either Hirano or Case, whomever it's going to be, which is another pickup of another woman. I can't even see what's written up there, but you can, so I think those are the other ones. It's going to depend on whether we get out, get busy, and care about it. But we could actually end up with, instead of 17 women in the United States Senate, end up with at least 25. There are good possibilities for women. And where to target? This is always a guess. I would put projects into Florida and Ohio. In Florida, we need to pull Obama in order to win. We need to pull Bill Nelson back in, even if it's dragging his sweet little self down. He's a lovely man, but it's hard to get him on the right path. His wife keeps him on a good path. She really does. And there are 8 really solid Democratic women out of our 26 congressional seats running this year. And they include some exciting women. Many of you last year met Lois Frankel. She has a very, very good chance to win that seat. She works like a dog, and she also works us like dogs, all of the Floridians who are clapping. She started her career as a Now Chapter member, so this is important to us. And there is a woman named Val Demings. Val was the first woman police chief up in Orange County. It's an African-American woman who is dynamic beyond belief, and I think she can and will win with help, a lot of help. Now in Ohio, we've got to get Sherrod Brown to hold the Senate. We've got to keep that state out of Mr. Romney's hands, because we need one of those states. He needs both. And they have a situation where out of their 16 congressional seats, there are about 6 really solid Democratic women running, more than they've ever had. I mean, there is a large increase in women running for office, but not with the Republicans this time. They had not made increases. So that's how I see what is, how I dream of what will be, but I'm pretty realistic in my analysis about being hard. If it comes down to making a guess, I will guess against us. So at this point, I feel fairly good about where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you saw at the bottom, the 3 women senators that would include Shelley Berkeley from Nevada and Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts. And can you go back one slide, please? And Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin. So when NowPAC is looking at our targeting, we are, and you will hear more about what you can do, we are looking at some of those places where we may ask you to take your vacation. And in fact, I would like, yes, if you could go back, yeah, if you can go forward, then they said to the what you can do. These are things we all know, but it doesn't hurt to be reminded of what we can do to move forward on this. Hold on, okay. You heard from Julie, talk with friends and family about why this election is so important. And then also be ready to have positive comments about your candidate. You know the old, you need an elevator speech, you need the 30-second, 15-second soundbite about why your candidate should be elected. You need to be ready, you need to have that in your mind. Wherever there is a candidate forum, you need to be there and ask questions. And you need to get your family and friends there to ask questions. Of course, we're going to work in coalition with our allies such as labor, and I think that I was glad, Julie, that you showed us the website where we can click into the poll watchers and like. And one of the things that our allies and we will be doing is the door-to-door and telephone canvassing to identify voters, following which, of course, you do a targeted GOTV, get out the vote. You also can hold a fundraiser for your candidates. You can register targeted voters. In most places, of course, when you register, you have to register everybody, but you don't have to go everywhere. You can go places where we are going to find a lot of people who are likely to be our kinds of voters. Go to the next slide, because this is the part that I like. This is a much more now-oriented slide. Oh, I have my little clicker. I should have done that. Thank you. All right, who remembers Zap Actions? And why we call them Zap Actions is they're lightning fast, they're high visibility, and you only need a few folks to be effective. The kind of Zap Actions you can do are limited only by your imagination. And you can have a lot of fun with these. And you can, for instance, do what we used to call another roadside attraction. Some people call them honk and wave. Others call them Burma shave. You can have a Burma shave where 4 people in a row have signs that rhyme and that are going to, well, now there is a danger that people who can't read very fast and move their lips when they read will crash into each other. It's not your fault. Okay? So you're gonna have some signs that make people kind of smile and that remind them about how important it is to vote and why you're your candidate. We once did a funeral for a politician's career who wasn't voting right, and that was a great deal of fun. I got to dress up as the elected official, and in fact, by the time we harassed him and his campaign so much, he did not run the next time. And we got a good feminist woman who is our now chapter activist into the Florida legislature, where she stayed for about 12 years. The other thing you can do is know your opposition's schedule and be there. Be there with your roadside attraction. I want to tell you, how many of you, anybody in this room remember Joe and Goldie Crispiolo? Okay, there's Floridians. Wonderful, wonderful older couple, now deceased. They went to a Newt Gingrich fundraiser, I mean a serious fundraiser, and they had signs wrapped around their waists. They were both tiny kind of people, and they went to the very far end of the room, away from the entrance, and they took out their signs and they held them up, and they were anti-Newt Gingrich signs. And of course their security for the Gingrich campaign came over and tried to escort them out. Well, not being shy, you would hear Goldie going, "I am walking as fast as I can." "Get your hands off my wife," Joe would say. "She's walking as fast as she can." It took them like 10 or 15 minutes to walk the length of that ballroom to get that. Now, you know, like this, the Emma Goldman thing, if I can't dance, it's not my revolution. If we can't have fun with this, we won't be attracting enough people to keep it going. So do things like that. Do things that are just good for your soul, but also make a point. And that got on the news, so that the news was not dominated by news comments without being balanced by a visual of this elderly couple shuffling along with their anti-Newt signs going, "Keep your hands off my wife."